Welcome back to Revise and Resubmit, the podcast that takes, those really dense academic papers and makes them surprisingly interesting. I'm Pavlov.
And I'm Nikita. Hey you, always looking to, level up your understanding of what makes the business world tick, then you're definitely in the right place. We're about to dive deep into a really fascinating piece of research. And interestingly, it's actually part of the session readings for the virtual summer school in Entrepreneurship Research 2025.
That's right. And what's particularly impressive, I think, is that this will be the 5th year of this no-fee summer school. And it kicked off back in 2021. And it's really become such a valuable resource for anyone interested in cutting-edge thinking in entrepreneurship.
Absolutely. It's a huge testament to the commitment of the people behind it. We should definitely give a big thank you to the driving forces here. Professor Vishal K. Gupta and PhD candidate Athena Skiadopoulou, both from the University of Alabama. They've really spearheaded this unique and very accessible program for the whole entrepreneurship research community.
They really have. And the paper we're focusing on today, it's a research note titled Advancing Entrepreneurship Theory Through Replication, a case study on contemporary methodological challenges, future best practices, and an entreaty for communality. It really gets to the heart of how we build, solid knowledge in any scientific field, really.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this a bit. So, for those of you who might not spend your days poring over research papers, the core idea here is replication. Think of it like this. If one scientist makes a big discovery, other scientists try to do the exact same experiment, right? To see if they get the same result. It's pretty fundamental.
Exactly. It's how we confirm, how we refine, and sometimes we'll even challenge our understanding of how things work. And in a dynamic field like entrepreneurship, where new ideas and models are constantly popping up, this verification process is absolutely critical. Helps separate the signal from the noise,
Totally. So what did these researchers actually set out to do then? Well, they tackled a pretty ambitious task, actually. They decided to try and replicate 19 studies that are considered, really important in the field, kind of foundational works that have significantly shaped how we think about new ventures starting up. And these studies all relied on a specific kind of data, often called PSED-type data, that comes from these large, comprehensive surveys like the panel study of entrepreneurial dynamics.
And what's fascinating here is that these PSED-type data sets are generally seen as, some of the most rigorous and carefully constructed data sources in the field. They're designed to give a broad representative picture of what's happening with entrepreneurship. So you'd naturally think that replicating studies based on this kind of data, it should be relatively straightforward, right? The data is public, the research is published.
That's the logical assumption, yeah. But here's where it gets really interesting. Out of their attempts to precisely replicate these 19 influential studies, they only managed to successfully replicate 6. Just 6. That's less than a third. Think about that for a sec. If less than a third of foundational studies can be reproduced easily, how much confidence can we really have in the advice and frameworks built on them? Now, this isn't about discrediting past work, but more about understanding the inherent uncertainty in a field that moves so fast.
It's surprisingly low success rate, yeah. And it really shines a light on some potential vulnerabilities in the groundwork of entrepreneurship research. The fact that they encountered so many obstacles, even with access to the same data, and they even reached out to the original researchers in many cases, it raises some really important questions about how knowledge is validated and built up in our field.
Okay, let's dig a little deeper into why this matters to you, our listener. If the research that forms the basis of our understanding isn't always easily reproducible, it suggests that some of the guidance, the theories, the insights out there might not be quite as rock solid as we'd hope. Like you said, this paper isn't saying those initial findings were wrong, necessarily, but it does highlight the real difficulties in consistently confirming and building upon them.
Precisely. And by understanding the specific challenges these researchers faced, we can start to think constructively about how to strengthen the rigor and reliability of entrepreneurship research going forward. Ultimately, this benefits everyone interested in entrepreneurship, right? From aspiring founders trying to figure things out to investors making big decisions, because it increases the likelihood that the knowledge being generated is dependable and practically applicable. As the authors themselves point out, their humbling experience highlights how changes at the author, journal, and institutional levels, indeed a communal effort, can encourage, facilitate, and expedite replication studies.
Yeah, so this deep dive isn't just about pointing out potential weakness. It's also about exploring paths forward, understanding how we can collectively make entrepreneurship research more robust, more trustworthy. And the fact that this paper is part of the curriculum at that virtual summer school for entrepreneurship research in 2025 really underscores that the academic community is engaging with these issues seriously.
Absolutely. It sets the stage for vital discussions among researchers about, refining our methods and fostering a more transparent, more collaborative research environment.
All right, so we've set the scene. We know the core finding this unexpected difficulty in replicating studies and why it matters. Now let's get into some of the specific hurdles these researchers actually ran into.
What's quite striking is just the sheer variety of challenges they faced. Despite working with publicly available data, the PSED and its international versions, and making real efforts to connect with the original research teams, they hit a multitude of obstacles just trying to get to the point where they could even run the analyses.
Okay, so what were some of these key roadblocks? The paper goes into quite a bit of detail, right?
Yeah, one of the primary difficulties was simply figuring out the precise sample, which businesses or individuals were actually included in the original studies. It seems like in many of the papers, the process of how certain cases were excluded from the initial raw data, maybe because of incomplete responses or missing info, just wasn't documented with enough detail.
Right, so a future researcher reads the paper, sees the final number of participants, but the specific steps to get to that number weren't clearly laid out. It's a bit like trying to recreate a complex dish without knowing all the little prep steps the original chef took, huh?
Exactly that. And this lack of transparency made it incredibly challenging for the replication team to start with the exact same set of data points, the same N as the original researchers. Without that identical starting point, any comparison of results becomes, less reliable. The paper even gives examples where they knew a variable's average had been statistically imputed, but they didn't know how many cases had been imputed, which just adds another layer of complexity.
And another significant issue they ran into was related to outliers, those data points way outside the norm. Given that large surveys like PSED often have extreme values, you'd expect a clear explanation in the original papers about how these were handled, right?
You would think so. But in roughly half of the studies they tried to replicate, there was just no mention of outliers at all. And as we know, even a few extreme values can seriously skew statistical results, potentially affecting whether something looks statistically significant or not.
Yeah.
The replicating team was often left just guessing about how outliers might have been dealt with, which obviously introduces a lot of uncertainty.
Wow, sounds like a lot of educated guessing was involved. Then there's the whole area of selecting and defining the specific variables used in the analysis. These PSED datasets have a ton of variables, often measuring similar ideas in slightly different ways.
Precisely. And when the original authors didn't explicitly state the precise names of the variables they used, or when journals didn't provide supplementary online materials with this crucial info, the replicating team was often left to make their best guess. Which variable most closely matched the description in the paper? They even mentioned instances where the original researchers themselves, when contacted years later, couldn't recall the specific variable names.
That's actually understandable, I suppose. Research moves on, memories fade, software gets updated. Which brings us to another set of hurdles, the specific software and any custom scripts that were used.
Yes, the paper really emphasizes that knowing which statistical software package, like Stata, SPSS, or R, and crucially, which version of that software was used originally, is vital for an exact replication. Different software, even different versions of the same software, can sometimes produce slightly different results, especially with more complex stats. They even hit a situation where data files from an older SPSS version just couldn't be opened by a newer one.
Whoa, that's a practical barrier you wouldn't necessarily even think about. Does the paper offer thoughts on how institutions or journals might tackle these kinds of practical issues?
It does touch on recommendations later, yeah. It's fascinating how software compatibility can stop things cold. And then there's the specific scripts, like KS cleans and case renorm. For those unfamiliar, these are specific statistical procedures used to clean and standardize the raw PSED survey data, basically ensuring a more reliable and comparable data set for analysis.
Right, those sound important for consistency.
They really are, for addressing potential biases and making sure findings can be more broadly applied. But the fact that a significant majority of the studies they looked at, around 63%, didn't explicitly state whether they had used these standard PSED data prep scripts, well, it adds yet another layer of uncertainty.
So it wasn't just one big thing making replication hard. It was often a combination of all these seemingly small details piling up, making it incredibly challenging to accurately reproduce the original work.
Exactly. And as the researchers point out, even when they were able to get data files directly from the original authors, they still weren't always successful in replicating the published results, which really underscores the point. Simply having the data isn't always enough. The entire methodological process needs to be documented with exceptional clarity and precision.
It really highlights the crucial importance of what the paper calls research documentation. If the detailed steps, variable creation, data manipulation, statistical analysis aren't meticulously recorded and easily accessible, it just creates huge obstacles for anyone trying to build on that work or verify it later.
Absolutely. The authors strongly advocate for researchers to document their entire research process comprehensively. This includes both the digital syntax, the code used for analysis, and detailed notes taken throughout the project. They even suggest proactively sharing final results and the associated data and code on platforms like ICPSR or even just personal cloud storage to ensure long-term accessibility.
That makes total sense. It's about creating a clear, transparent audit trail for the research. Now, beyond these technical challenges, the paper also touches on some of the more human and systemic factors, right? Like trying to contact authors.
Yeah, one issue they definitely encountered was simply locating the original researchers, especially for older studies. People change universities, leave academia, contact info goes out of date. It really highlights why maintaining up-to-date professional profiles is important.
Makes sense.
And they did observe instances where original authors seemed hesitant to share their data or code, sometimes citing valid concerns like data privacy, perhaps, but maybe sometimes feeling like their original work was being scrutinized negatively.
That's interesting. Could that reluctance sometimes stem from legitimate concerns about, say, misinterpretation or misuse of their data rather than just defensiveness?
That's a very fair point, and likely part of the complex picture. The paper doesn't delve deeply into motives, but it acknowledges the friction, which really just underscores the need for that cultural shift around replication you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it shouldn't feel like an attack, but just part of the process. A mechanism for strengthening our collective understanding. The authors are pretty clear that the goal is advancing knowledge and refining theories, not pursuing personal agendas or anything political.
Right. Okay, so in light of all these challenges they ran into, the researchers put forward a set of best practices. These are aimed at improving both how replication studies are done and the overall replicability of future research in entrepreneurship.
Yes, they've outlined 10 key recommendations. These are directed at individual researchers, the broader community, and academic institutions. We won't list all 10 right now, but generally they focus on being exceptionally clear and detailed about every single step, from data prep and cleaning to outlier treatment, variable construction, which specific software and scripts were used, all of it.
Essentially making the entire how of the research as transparent and well documented as humanly possible.
Exactly. And they also stress maintaining that thorough documentation throughout the project and making both the data and the analysis code publicly available whenever it's ethically and practically feasible. For academic journals, they suggest things like policies encouraging or even requiring authors to submit data and code alongside manuscripts. And maybe even investing in data analysts who could do a basic replicability check before full peer review.
Ooh, that's a really interesting idea, like a pre-publication replicability screen. That could certainly help build greater confidence in what gets published. The paper also mentions the role universities and tenure committees play, suggesting they could place greater value on and give more recognition for replication studies, maybe even build a replication attempt into PhD training.
That would definitely send a powerful signal about the importance of this kind of work. It really sounds like the central theme, the big takeaway from the paper, is this call for communality. This idea that all the different stakeholders, researchers, journals, institutions need to collaborate to create the culture that actively supports and values replication.
That's precisely it. It's not just on individual researchers to be more rigorous. It requires a collective commitment from everyone involved to prioritize transparency and make it easier to verify and build upon our existing knowledge base.
So interestingly, despite finding so many failures to replicate, the authors actually see a positive side here, a potential for learning and growth.
Yes, they really emphasize that even when a direct replication isn't successful, the process of trying can yield invaluable insights. It can uncover hidden assumptions in the original work, reveal methodological quirks that might have swayed the findings, or highlight important context, maybe factors that explain why results differ across studies or over time. As the paper itself quotes, scientific progress depends on integrating the lessons learned from repeated experiments that produce discordant outcomes.
So a failure to replicate isn't necessarily saying the original finding was wrong, but it's more like a crucial opportunity, an opportunity to refine our theories, better understand the conditions where they hold true, and ultimately get a more nuanced, more robust understanding.
Exactly. It pushes us to ask new, more precise questions and explore why results might vary. The authors even suggest that what they call constructive replication, where you intentionally change certain aspects of the original study but keep the core question, can be a particularly powerful way to advance theory.
It really sounds like this deep dive into replication challenges reveals that even in areas where we think we have a solid handle on things, the very foundations of our knowledge are constantly being examined and hopefully refined.
Absolutely. What's fascinating here is how this paper, by highlighting these difficulties, even with public data and influential studies, truly underscores the inherent complexity of building reliable knowledge in any scientific field. It really prompts us to think about how we ensure trustworthiness and validity in research.
So for you, the listener, maybe consider how these principles, transparency, thorough documentation might be relevant in your own world, whether it's information you use at work or just things you read about. What questions does this raise for you about the reliability of information generally and the importance of, being able to verify findings? Definitely something to mull over.
And don't forget to subscribe to Revise and Resubmit on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And if you're enjoying the show and want to support us in creating more insightful content, consider becoming a patron on Patreon. Every contribution helps us continue this journey of exploration and discovery. Until next time, keep those minds curious, keep questioning, and keep revising and resubmitting.